Greetings and salutations, all my fellow sovereigns. This is the Vocational Science Freedom Saturday Night Civics and Sovereignty class, and this will be our ninth reading of website USA versus US.info. And this site went up very early on in the internet times. I think it was kind of mid to late 90s. And it's been expanded on quite a bit. And what it does is it's showing the two sides of government and the situation that we live in, being one de facto and the other de jure. So the de facto side is the right-hand side column, and the de jure side is the left-hand side. And de jure means by right, and de facto means by fact, meaning it's there, it's in existence, but it's not legitimate. Okay, and we left off at records versus records. We got done with the benefits prior to that. So ex officio clerks. County clerk is also clerk of the superior court, i.e. the court of common law and courts of record. Well, that can be true in some counties. It really depends on how the state constitution was organized. And as of right now, you're never going to find a county clerk that's also the clerk of the court. Now, I'm not saying that can't happen because, again, like I said, it really depends on the state constitutions. I think I have seen some written like that, but it's kind of an older way of doing things. And because the courts are now all private for-profit businesses, the county clerk is not really going to have any dealings with what's going on in the court systems. So, okay. And then the de jure aspect of keeping records. So basically the records of your house. So people used to keep records of their dealings, marriages, births, deaths, that sort of thing. And they would keep track of them in the pages of their family Bible. There are some people in the VSOF who have actually gone and purchased a record book for their house. They got it in a leather binder, and they keep their deeds in there. They keep their car titles in there, and they will also keep any of the things that used to be kept in family Bibles. And it also says here on the website, churches in the old days were known to keep records. True. The English church, they kept records of paupers. So someone who was a pauper, they had to get from the church what was called a settlement certificate. And in a sense, the settlement certificates were kind of a precursor to the birth certificates now, the way the whole system ran. And if a pauper wanted to move from one parish to another parish, they had to present basically their settlement certificate, which was something that was issued by the church, to the new parish whenever they got there, basically. So that's the precursor. I'm not going to get into settlement certificates. I might at some point in time make a class specific to just the birth certificate and basically the entire history of it. And I will definitely cover settlement certificates there because I only know that they exist, but I've never gone through the totality of the history of them. There's some of it stated within the class that I did, which is on the top page of all of the VSOF platforms, which is how your estate is stolen at birth. And in that class, I definitely cover some of the history of the birth certificate, and I get into the settlement certificate therein. And if there's one class that everybody should watch, it's definitely that one, because that's why I put it up at the top of all the platforms, because it gives a really good general layout of how all of this started and what's going on regarding the registration, the administration, and how the de facto government sets you up from birth, basically. Okay. And then, so on the de facto side now, the author has county clerk, records office, created by statute to keep track of the corporate government's holdings, which are applied as collateral to the increasing debt. The written records are a continuation of the Doomsday Book, which is, the Doomsday Book was a book that was created by William the Conqueror sometime after 1066 when he conquered England. And what he did was he basically recreated what the Roman rolls used to be. Because in Rome, you had to register your property with Rome. And there's an interesting saying that goes, and some of you might have heard this, it goes, possession is 9/10 of the law. Well, no one ever questions what that last tenth is. And under Roman civil law, it was called occupatio or occupartii, and it was the registering of whatever it was, usually lands, with Rome. And if you did not have your lands registered with Rome, then you weren't seen as a Roman citizen, and you didn't have the protection of Rome, was part of it. And after Rome fell and the Dark Ages happened, and William the Conqueror came over in 1066, not to say that wasn't still around, part and parcel of the aspect of the Dark Ages, it kind of was. He brought this system back into England, where in England they had Allodial title, and they traded land with a very solemn ceremony. It was called the Oath of the Blood and the Soil, and it's literally where you get the idea and the term allodium from. Someone would go onto the land and they would exchange either some dirt or some twigs, and then the man that would take over the land literally had to take a knife to his hand, draw some blood, and literally drip it into the soil. And then there was a ceremony that was done, and that's where it came from. It has a very interesting Old English name. It's like the Oloverfulson, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And that ceremony was where the man said, who was purchasing it, said, yes, I will keep this land in good order. I will keep the metes and bounds correctly. I will take care of it because I have an oath to God to keep track of and keep good care of the land of which God has provided us. And so that's how the English did it prior to William the Conqueror. And then when he came over, he said, okay, we're going to register all the lands now, very much like Rome. And he created this thing called the Doomsday Book. Very ominous in name and ominous in existence and features as well. And he forced everybody to register in it. And if you weren't willing to register in it, or if you didn't, then that land was literally pretty much open for the taking. So that's a little thing on the Doomsday Books. Okay, so the written records are a continuation of the Doomsday Book, which keeps track of the Crown of England's holdings. The Doomsday Book originated, as was written record of the conquered holdings of King William I, which was later the basis of taxes and grants. And the next section, whenever something is registered, it is actually being put into the king's domain. Well, it depends who you register or what you register with. It's not automatically the king's domain. It could be a corporation. The words registered is derived from the word regis, which means kingly. Therefore, recording a document today is the same as registering it and putting into the king's domain. Okay, fine. That's the etymology of the word. However, we don't have a king here, but what we do have is corporate governance, and we're being run by Roman civil law, of which these systems are very much over the top of us by de facto acts. And one of those de facto acts is the Torrens registry system. And if you want to do a deep dive into the Torrens registry system and learn the history of it, it originated in Australia, and then the first county that it was ever implemented in America was in northern Wisconsin. I don't recall exactly the name of the county off the top of my head, but it weaseled its way in up there to the detriment of eventually the entire country, because when you put it onto the Torrens registry system, that's what initiates and allows, it not allows, I should say, that's what the county uses to keep track of who's been paying property taxes, basically. So if you want to get your land off of the Torrens registry system, there's a way to do that, but I'm not going to cover that tonight. But it's extremely important to know that you do not have to have your land in this foreign Roman civil law registry system. Okay. And yes, you're right. And Cap says, you mean Wisconsin? Where in the Constitution that all lands are allodial? That Wisconsin? Yes, exactly. That one. And not to put too fine a point on that, it was probably that reason that they started it in Wisconsin first, so that they could attack the allodial title aspect of the lands in Wisconsin. So, all right, so next section, or next part of this section. Property recorded or registered at the recorder's office makes the corporate de facto government holders in due course. Anything registered can be taken away at any time. That includes cars, guns, and your home. Well, taken away for whatever the statutes say, and if you're not using it the way that they want you to use it, yeah, that's kind of the point. Particularly if you don't pay your property taxes, they'll create what's called a tax deed, and then they'll quote unquote sell your taxes or sell your house to somebody else when nobody had the right to take it to begin with. Because if you don't want their services, and particularly if you remove it off of the Torrens registry system, then there's absolutely nothing they can do except literally come to your house for a gunfight and decide to try and forcibly take it. Well, that'll end up the way, you figure it will. So, last part, your TV is not recorded there. Therefore, you are holder in due course for the TV. Well, that's debatable. Some people literally do register everything from TVs to toasters to refrigerators nowadays. You get those little cards when you buy something, and it's, oh, you get to register it, right? Well, don't do that, because in a sense you're registering it just like you would everything else with the land or whatnot, except you're literally doing it right back to the corporation. Let's go back over to the de jure side here. So record the date family members are born, married, and the date they pass on the family Bible. On the de facto side, birth certificate is required. It creates a trust and puts one into commerce as a fictional persona. Well, not exactly. The birth certificate is nothing but a warehouse receipt. It says, okay, this is the thing that was registered. It gives a description of the property that was registered, the baby, and says who was the informant, which is the mother, and who was the person of running the warehouse, basically, at the time, that said, okay, I see this and I take document of the thing. And that's usually the doctor who's acting on behalf of the foundling hospital. So it doesn't create a trust. It simply registers and warehouses the estate. Now, in a certain sense, is something warehoused in a form of a trust? Yes, I suppose you could go there. That's true in its ultimate sense in law, but it doesn't create a trust in the aspect of how most people think of what a trust is. So it doesn't create some separate fictional thing. They do that later, but that is not from the birth certificate. That comes in later from things like the Social Security Trust and various other things like the fidelity accounts and the bonds that are connected to your birth certificate. Those things are in trust, sure, because they're in with trust companies. But the birth certificate does not create a trust. And then it says the death certificate closes the trust. No, the death certificate just, again, records the fact that the estate is basically still warehoused. But that's the reason why we're all supposed to claim our estates, and we're not supposed to have the corporate state constantly administering our asses 24 hours a day. Okay, next one is marriage. On the de jure side, common law marriage, agreement of the two parties and consent of the father of the bride is really required to be married, and or 2, married by a minister or pastor constitutes a marriage, and or 3, living together for more than 7 years constitutes a marriage. I think in some states it's 10, but 7 or 10. And then yes, you're considered to be common law married. And strangely enough, that seems to be one of the only places where people ever hear the term common law. But Yes, that really is all you have to do. Now, the ceremony was optional. The 7 years is only encountered when one of the two requirements for common law marriage was missing, presumably the consent of the father. The 7 years is the law of Jubilee, which is the forgiveness of the obligation to allow the marriage to be lawful. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that there was a little history behind that. I'd have to double check that. It sounds reasonable, but again, we found a lot of things in this website that are close, but not 100%. So always double check. And then certificate of matrimony. This is a little sample. Yeah, so you could create something like this. I know that Amaru created something like that for his marriage. I also know that he created his own birth records for his child, all of which we should all do as that used to be done, as it said above here, by placing it into the Bible. But I think a documentation that's specific to the event is something that people should put their effort into making, and then put it into your house book and save it in there. It says both George Washington and Abraham Lincoln were married without a marriage license. They simply recorded their marriages in their family Bibles. Yes. Okay, now let's get to the de facto side. So marriage licenses involves the corporate state to be the third party in your union, and whatever you conceive is theirs and becomes their offspring, children. Not exactly true. The children end up, again, going into wardship because they get registered. That is why they can take away your children at any time at their discretion. The state leaves them in your custody and care unless or until they find reason not to. Well, yes and no. It's not that your children are not your property. They are at law. It's that you register them, and then the infant, the child, never comes forward to claim their estate. So the administration happens all the way to their death, basically, unless they come forward and claim it properly. And so definitions, Black's Law Dictionary, license, the permission by competent authority to do an act which without such permission would be illegal. Right. Marriage license, a license or permission granted by public authority to persons, infants, who intend to intermarry. Interesting that it doesn't say what the term intermarry actually means. That was something that happened after the Civil War, and all the blacks were freed under the Proclamation of Lincoln, supposedly. But the situation was that still, with the 14th Amendment, what they did was what the corporate government did, what the Luciferians did, to put it that way, is they moved the slaves from being private property to being public property. So if you wanted to marry someone who was public property, i.e. to intermarry, you had to get a license for it because that was basically the government's property. And nothing's really changed as far as getting that marriage license. So, and then I do have another little snippet of something I pulled out of a law book a long time ago. So I think it might have been out of Black's, but anyway. Okay, so same interest of estate. Marriage is a contract, but it is not merely a civil contract, for it can only be entered into in a manner recognized by law, and can only be dissolved in like manner. The state is the third party to every such contract, and has a direct interest therein. That's where you get family courts from, folks. You agreed to allow the state as a third party to come into your business with your spouse. That is exactly the problem. That's where it starts. And then they say after that, well, you have to register your children. You have to get a birth certificate. You have to ABC, XYZ, whatever. Then it is because that state is the third party, and not very many people understand that. So Okay, then marriage certificate, an instrument which certifies marriage and is executed by the person officiating at the marriage. It is not intended to be signed by the parties, but is evidence of the marriage. Well, that's interesting because I know in some countries, particularly some European countries, they do sign them and they sign them at the wedding and there's witnesses and all kinds of stuff. But so anyway, again, the best thing to do is just create your own documentation. Yes, have witnesses sign it. I would suggest 4 at least, because 4 is a quorum. And then record that onto your house records. There's some links here. I did not check them prior to class. Let's see if they work. Okay, yes. 5 reasons why Christians should not obtain a state marriage license by Pastor Matt Terhelwa. Terhelwa? Yeah, not sure how to pronounce that. This looks like it's a little bit of a lengthy read, but it's good that people are waking up to this because you should not have a license to do anything. And since we're on the subject of licenses, I just want to state something from a logical reasoning point of view. Think about licenses like this. Can the state give you a license to do something that is by its very nature unlawful? And the answer is no, they can't. So if the state can't give you something in the form of a license to do something that's unlawful, well, then by deductive reasoning, what are they doing? They're just giving you licenses to do things that are already lawful. So why are you going and paying money and begging daddy to say, please? Doesn't make any sense. Never has. But it's how Roman civil law functions. So that's, the real reason. And last little part here says marriage is a civil contract to which there are 3 parties, the husband, the wife, and the state. True. That's actually a court case. Looks like it says Van Coten versus Van Coten, 154 Northeast 146. Looks like a federal case. Okay. And then on to property. So the de jure side, full and complete ownership, allodial title, land patents, allodial freeholder. 2, cannot be taxed, only voluntary. 3, you are the king of your castle. 4, no government intrusion, involvement, or controls. Right, meaning I don't have to get a permit to put up a fucking shed. Right? I don't have to get a permit or license to have chickens in my backyard or to turn my garage into a machine shop or something, right? Doesn't exist. So the point is that one should stop asking for permission to do things that are already lawful. Okay. Now, on the allodial land aspect, I've done many classes on property and allodial title, and they're listed within the playlists on both YouTube and Rumble and on Odyssey as well. And I don't want to get into the totality of the difference between allodial title. To get into the whole history of American allodial title would be way too much. Let's just say, just for the short and simple part of it, that as Captain mentioned in chat, that the Wisconsin Constitution has a clause within it that states that all lands in Wisconsin are allodial and feudal tenures are prohibited. Now, there's an aspect of the federal Constitution, which is the Equal Protections Clause, basically. And what it basically boils down to is this. If somebody in Texas has a right to do something, then that means somebody in Wisconsin has the same right. That's pretty much how that works, because the states were all supposed to enter the union with equal footing, and all of the people, they're being equal to other fellow sovereigns, other fellow members of the peerage, no matter where in America you may roam. So that's why in the Declaration of Allodial Lands that the Vocational Science of Freedom created, that, well, we didn't create it. I created it and helped create it with some other people a long, long time ago, and now we use it, to put it that way. I don't want to take away credit for where credit's due, because Steve Carr and Andy and I think a few other people in Wisconsin did a lot of work in creating that Declaration of Allodial Lands. And so anyway, the Wisconsin Constitution, that clause is within that declaration. But you can use it in any state. It doesn't just have to be Wisconsin. And yes, manifest, that's a good point. Like James Bond, a license to kill. Right. You can't be given a license to kill someone. So what are you doing? Oh, you're just literally playing the game of, daddy may I. Okay, so let's get over to the de facto side now. So property, privilege to use. That's right. That makes you what's called a usufructuary. See, because under Roman civil law, what they do is they split the title. So you have legal title and you have equitable title. The legal title, whoever holds that, is the one that actually has the capacity to sell the thing, actually owns the thing. Whoever has equitable title, the right to use is anything that you get for the aspect of a title. So let's say your car, right? So your car, the car's title, the actual title, is the manufacturer's certificate of origin. But what happens is that when you go to the dealership, you say, hey, I want to buy a car. I got $20,000 cash. Guy says, hey, great. Show me a license. You go, sure. Here's my license. And he goes, great. And then he takes the manufacturer's certificate of origin, the MCO, and then he faxes it and probably mails it also off to the state of which you showed him a license for. Because you said, hey, daddy said I could buy a car and use it. And the dealership said, okay, great. Then daddy gets the title, right? So you have legal and equitable title. The legal title is that MCO. That thing's gone. That's off to the state. And from my understanding, when they get it, they just make a digital record of it and then they shred it so that no one can ever get it back. And then the equitable title is what you do when you go to a title place and you get a certificate of title. Now, a certificate of title is not the title. It's that aspect that you have the right to use the thing. And in a certain sense, it also is prima facie evidence that you've registered it. So that's what the cops always look up when they check out their computers. They say, oh, did you register this car? Is it registered? Yes or no? And if it's registered, well, then guess what? They can give you tickets for using it in a way that they don't like not putting on your seatbelt or not having a catalytic converter or driving 5 miles over the speed limit or having a taillight out, whatever. It's their car, okay? You want to get around that? You go to a state that's outside your state, take cash, go to a dealership, buy the car, and then demand to have the manufacturer's certificate of origin and tell the dealership that you are exporting the car. That's the only way that you're going to get the MCO. And technically, you're not lying because, yes, you are going to take it across state lines, and that is considered an export because each and every state is their own nation. So, okay. So privilege of use, again, property. So fee title. Now we're getting back to land now. So fee title, feudal title. That's where the term feudal comes from fee. Fee oath, actually. And then 2, grant deed or trust deed note, grantor and grantee in all caps, fictional persona. Well, it's just showing that it's registered with your estate name. 3, property tax must pay. 4, other taxes such as water district taxes. 5, subject to control by government. 6, vehicle registration. The incorporated state owns vehicles on behalf of U.S. Well, they get registered to them, as I just explained. 7, property and vehicles are collateral for the government debt. Yes, strange thing about that gets into 1933 and what the state governors did, which is basically commit treason against their own people, meaning the people of Wisconsin or the people of Texas, or so be it. The state governors went to Washington, D.C. in 33 at the behest of Roosevelt. And what they did there was they agreed to pledge all of the property that was registered on the state records to the feds so that they could take out loans from a private international banking cartel called the Federal Reserve System because they were bankrupt at that time because the Fed printed money into oblivion right after they started that shitbag existence of a thing in 1913, thanks to the trader Woodrow Wilson, and blew up the economy and everything went to hell. It was fun for a short period of time, which was called the Roaring Twenties, where it seemed like everybody had money and everybody could do everything. Well, yeah, when you're printing money out of existence, that's what happens to it. everybody has it for a short period of time and all can have some fun for a little while. And then chickens come home to roost, and that's pretty much it. And then everything collapsed. And the government said, "Oh, we're bankrupt. Help us." And the state said, "Okay, we'll help you." But they were all in on it anyway. But that was the totality of when everything got pledged to them. And it was the slow boiling of the frog to get people to register their lands, their children, and everything else, all, leading up to 33. So, again, if you want all of that history, watch the Vocational Science of Freedom timeline class. And again, go to the playlists on either Rumble, Odyssey, or YouTube. Or actually, no, it's not on YouTube because I talk way too much about the Luciferian filth and what the Jews have done in this timeline class, so I cannot put it onto YouTube. But feel free to watch it on the other two platforms. It is an extremely important class. It covers a document that I have been creating and expanding on for 30 years. Basically a timeline of everything that's happened. And the reason I had to do that was so that I could keep myself sane and literally be able to figure out what on earth has transpired to get us to where we're at. So if you want to know what happened in 33 and in 1913, watch the timeline class. It'll get you there. Okay. And then next is a quote from FDR again. "All the property of this country now belongs to the state and will be used for the good of the state." Close quote. Get the point? By the way, that son of a bitch wrote a book called On Our Way when he did all this. And he admits within said book that what he did was not constitutional and he didn't have any authority to do it. But he had to do it because of the emergency. Because America was in an emergency. Who caused the fucking emergency? Oh, that's right. Your fellow Luciferian cocksuckers. Got it. That's the problem. People keep going back to look for solutions and give us a remedy and help us. They go back begging to the same people that caused the problem. We need to band together, tribe up, and solve our own problems. But you can only solve the problems that you know are problems. But anyway, mortgage. Mort gage means dead hand pledge. Latin, mort means death. Gage means pledge. Therefore, a mortgage is a death pledge. Most people never really own their house, even unto death. End up paying more than twice the initial cost of the house. A mortgage is designed so that someone else will make money on you during your lifetime. True. Remove all debt from the Jews, and you will have your country back. Dare I say it. All right, next part, free enterprise. This is a short little part. Free enterprise versus corporatism. So the people engage in the free enterprise by trading one's labor for another's labor. There is no filing, registering, or obtaining permission or license from any government structure. Right, that's just called trading. The people are responsible for themselves and each other. The people do not rely on insurance to overcome irresponsibility and capriciousness. True. On a side note regarding insurance, everybody should know that every single insurance contract and every single time that any matter ever goes to court regarding insurance, it's always, always, always adjudicated under maritime amnesty. That is the only jurisdiction of which insurance is adjudicated. Why? Because it started there. It started as maritime insurance, and it still is. Regardless if we're on the land or not, that's still where it's adjudicated at, folks. So just know that even the simple thing of, you're going to get some insurance, well, guess what? If anything goes awry, the thing that it's going to be sent off to is going to be not a court of record, but it's going to be a court of maritime amnesty. So just be aware of that when you're thinking about getting insurance on particularly yourself, like life insurance. Okay, corporatism. Composed of, encourages, and creates a corporate structure of corporations and big businesses that use people as human resources to further its goal to grow and expand and become more powerful, thereby eliminating competition and becoming more controlling. True. as I think Rockefeller once said, competition is a sin or something like that, I believe he said. Basically promoting the idea that eventually there'll just be one corporation owning everything in the entire world, which is portrayed in a kind of a funny movie. I can't remember the name of that movie now. It was a futuristic movie about how everything had gone to hell. It was based upon a guy that had gone to sleep for a very long period of time and woke up, and turns out that he was like the smartest man on earth. Yeah, Idiocracy. Thank you. Yeah, that's very much where this entire global system is headed. It's literally headed towards idiocracy, not just from the standpoint that everybody's being dumbed down, but that it's all moving towards literally just Mr. Global, one single corporation to rule them all, if you will. And yes, that's a shout out to Tolkien as well, because he also understood that. He just decided to make metaphors of it in a fantasy book series. So anyway, next paragraph. The thing created, the corporation, becomes more powerful than the creator, man, who created it. Man is no longer free, but is subservient, a slave, to the corporate structure. The corporate structure needs to reduce the wages of its human resources to decrease costs, to increase profit, to keep growing. True. There was also, to be on the aspect of corporations, there's a great documentary, and I'm going to make sure that I re-upload it. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. There's a documentary called The Corporation, and it was done by, I think, a Canadian filmmaker. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Anyway, the documentary The Corporation is a great documentary. It goes through the history of corporations, how they got created, what limited liability is, the fact that there was a study, I think it was a Princeton study done by I think it was the psychologist division. And they did a study and they said, okay, if a corporation's a person, whatever, fictional, but what kind of a person is a corporation? Meaning, what kind of mental capacity, what kind of morality, whatever, would a corporation be? And they did all these various studies and tests and thought, okay, if this be true, if that's true, so and so and so forth, what would this thing be? It turns out that a corporation is a psychopath, which makes perfect sense because it never stops. It'll lie to you to obtain anything. It has no morality whatsoever. And it'll just keep growing and growing and growing until you kill it, basically. It'll just keep stealing from you until you kill it, to put it that way. So I always found that interesting, that a corporation is a psychopath. All right, to continue. Corporations eat each other and grow bigger and more powerful, thereby allowing fewer persons having bigger egos controlling the lives of common folk from cradle to grave. True. Corporations have no feelings. True. What did I just say? Corporations' primary purpose is to grow and thereby less responsible and less sympathetic towards the people. Right. They literally, a corporation it has no empathy. It's impossible for a corporation to have empathy. And even though people think about corporations like, oh, like McDonald's is like, fun and happy. And maybe the corporation of like, I don't know, Monsanto is like 3-piece black suit with a, sidearm ready to shoot you in the head. I don't know. Right. But these ideas that like corporations have some sort of persona to them, it's bullshit. That's the corporation having an easement running through your mind already. There's a whole freeway system running through your mind that the corporations have put in there. And what you need to do is start deconstructing it and throwing that shit out. Because you have to realize when you start to react to something that either you see in the store, you see on TV, or wherever, stop and think about why you're reacting the way you are. Chances are it's because there's an easement in your mind put there by a corporation or some other talking head when it comes to the biggest corporations in the world, which are fucking governments. So, or the corporation called the company, also known as the CIA. I won't get into them, but most people know what their business is all about. Yes, exactly, Spectre. Delete, 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 delete. Just get rid of it. You can fill it up later, your own brain, but as the Taoist story goes, there was once a man who came to a Taoist master and said, "Master, I'd like to learn what you have to teach here." And the master said, okay, tell me a little bit about yourself. And so the man started talking about what he knew and other things that he'd learned. And the master came over and said, would you like a cup of tea? He said, sure. So the master started pouring the tea into the teacup, and the tea got higher and higher in the teacup. And then it overflowed over the teacup, and then it filled up the saucer, and then it filled up the saucer, and it started spreading across the table, and it landed in the gentleman's lap, and he jumped up and he said, what are you doing? And the master said, your brain is like this teacup. It's all full. How can I put anything else into it? You must empty your cup before you come to me. And that's a good analogy from the standpoint of what's in our own brains and what you think you know. Everybody should empty their cup. Or, as the line from Star Wars, Yoda said, you must unlearn what you have learned. Because if your cup's full, you're not putting anything else in it. So just be aware of that. Particularly don't let a corporation fill it up. Okay, to continue. Thereby relying on utilizing insurance and other resources such as the corporate government to bail themselves out of irresponsible critical situations, hence the bank bailout. Okay, next section is the common law right to travel. And I'm going to blow through this pretty quickly. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, again, because we have a lot of other classes that go far more into detail about the right to travel and licensing and everything else that goes along with it. So make sure that you watch the right to travel classes on the VSOF platforms. So what I do want to do with this section is I'm just going to try and read as much of the case law and much of the holdings as I possibly can, because it pretty much explains itself once you start reading the holdings for the right to travel classes or cases. So let's start on the de jure side. So sovereigns have a right to use the common way, such as traveled way, right of way, for locomotion purposes. The right to travel is an ancient right acknowledged by the Magna Carta. True. The right to travel was recognized in the Articles of Confederation. True. Another thing I want to make a point about regarding the right to travel by public right of way. If you look at all of the original land patents for America, and you'll see that a lot of them run, that the roads, a lot of them run right in between the land patent. Well, why was that? It was because one sovereign said, okay, I'll give up this little strip of land if you're willing to give up your little strip of land on the other side so that people can get across our land that we own, and we're not going to charge them rent, and we're not going to have them pay a toll, and neither one of us has to complain that the road goes completely through one of our properties, right? So that's the point. When you are traveling on a road, the state, unless it's the interstate, because the interstates are actually owned by the federal government, unless it's the interstate, the state does not own the land that's underneath the road. Okay? Nor do they own the road itself, because your gas tax is paid for the completion of the road. So I get into the right to travel classes, particularly when you wanted to start fighting venue about the fact that you weren't in this state, which I talked about last time, and I won't rehash that again. But it gets to the fact that all of the roads are on our land. Okay? So to continue. Liberty of the common way. True. No driver's license is required for private, personal, and recreational use of the common way. Also true. A driver's license can only be required for those people using the common way for hire, commercial purposes, such as taxi drivers, truck drivers, bus drivers. That's de jure. I guess I'll skip over to the de facto side, just cut it off right here. So driver's license are required because driving is a privilege. Well, right, because it's a privilege of you using the state's property, as we previously stated. First state law requiring all drivers to pass an exam before receiving a commercial use privilege license took effect in July of 1913. Surprise, surprise. Same year as their filthy bank. In New Jersey, beginning in 1920. Courts began to hold that driving is not a right, but a privilege that the state may revoke. Well, if you're using the roadways as a place of business, that's true. Because if you're using the roadways as a place of business that the rest of the sovereigns pay for, but you're making money off of that as either a for-hire carrier or a contract carrier, then yes, You should have a license to do that. I get it. You drive enormous trucks that do extra damage to the road. Sure, you should pay more money to use the road. Totally get that. Not a problem. What I have a problem with is forcing me to use a license to travel from point A to point B. Sorry, you don't have the capacity and right to do that. If you did, that would make you the master of everybody in America, and we'd all be slaves because you couldn't ever leave any place without going anywhere, right? Without permission. Remember what I said last time about what is a slave? It's something that is overly dependent on something else. Well, if you literally have to ask somebody permission to leave your house to travel down the road, I'd say that's pretty much being a slave. So, next section, may lose license to privilege or have it suspended at the whim of government. Yeah, true. Must comply with the Department of Motor Vehicles, the vehicle code, which is ever changing, and the highway patrol. Right. Well, again, that's all dealing with commerce, or that's all it's supposed to deal with is commerce. Let's put it that way. Okay. And then private conveyance versus motor vehicle. Yeah, okay. I'm not even going to get into the hacks of the verbiage between side and side, but anyway, basically what the de facto is doing is that anything that's being used for commerce, or if there's a presumption that you're acting in commerce, then that's how they're going to basically go after you. Like a chauffeur, at least I'll read this one. A chauffeur is paid compensation for his services. Right. Fine. So you have a passenger when you're operating commerce. You're a traveler, not a driver, and you have travelers, not traffic, because traffic is commerce, trade, sales, and exchange of merchandise, bills, money, and the like. That's Bouvier's. And then the two sides of like peace officer, police officer. Well, this side, the de facto side, is always just going to be literally land pirates is what they are. They're pulling you over to commandeer property, except it's on land instead of out at sea, but they're basically still land pirates, particularly when they start doing civil asset forfeiture and just stealing money in your glove box or out of your wife's purse or wherever. Americans have the right to travel freely in their cars. These cases are covered on the positive side. Chicago Motor Coach versus Chicago, important case. Thompson versus Smith, important case. Kent versus Dulles, important case. Schnackman versus Dulles, I don't think I know that one. Swift versus City of Topeka, yes. Indiana Supreme Court, Hollard versus Barnock, I think I have that one as well. So anyway, there's a lot of cases that clearly prove that we have the right to travel. The problem is, and you say, okay, well then why aren't the courts upholding it? Because you're going and getting a license, because it's contractual, okay? The right exists, but you're waiving the right because you have decided to go and get a license to do something that was lawful to begin with. And Manifest asked, it's that way we have state routes versus federal routes. Well, the federal routes are the interstates. And the thing is that the feds bought the land to put the interstates onto. So technically, if you are on an interstate, you are in federal jurisdiction. So better to take a state rural route and just enjoy the countryside, I say. And no, it's not about the states reserve their right of ways. It deals with, again, the land patents, and that all the roads are on some sovereign's land, even if the sovereign isn't paying attention to it. Okay. Next case, the state cannot issue a license or charge a fee for the exercise of that right. Murdoch versus Pennsylvania. If the state does try to license or charge for the exercise of a right, the people may engage in that right with impunity. That's Shuttlesworth versus Birmingham. That's an Alabama case. I believe that's a federal case as well. Next one, a right cannot be made into a privilege. True. That's several cases there. Also, basically, the Sixth Amendment. Next one, all laws repugnant to the Constitution are null and void. That's Marbury versus Madison, and that's not Miranda versus Arizona. Technically, what Miranda versus Arizona says is that where substantive rights are involved, there shall be no legislation or rulemaking that would abrogate them. So cops just can't make up rules. Judges can't just make up rules when it deals with a substantive right. Now everybody talks about Miranda versus Arizona of the aspect of, well, read me my rights. I have my Miranda rights. Okay, fine. That's an interesting part of that case. But that's not the holding of the case. The holding of the case is what I just said. Where substantive rights are involved, there can be no rulemaking or legislation that would abrogate them. That's the point. Okay, now onto the de facto side. Law enforcement out there has changed drastically over the past few years. Well, I would say the past few decades. Yes, they're literally now an armed, standing army against you. Today's traffic court is nothing more than a collection of agencies for the government. The cops are the collection agents, and the judge is the head collector who plays God over the lives of unsuspecting Americans. Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a better way to break that down, which of course I have been doing, so I won't rehash that. DUI checkpoints and other traffic stops bring in a lot more revenue to the cities via car impoundments. Tow truck companies are in bed with the police and for monetary gain. Both are committing theft and are in violation of the RICO Act. That's true, because all of this is basically racketeering. And as I said, it's also inland piracy is what it is. So when you have a bunch of armed people that are specifically going and coming to you and saying, give me your money, particularly under civil asset forfeiture, or saying, show me a license or else I'm not going to let you leave and I'm going to take your car from you. That's piracy. That's racketeering. So both are committing theft and are in violation of the RICO Act, racketeering, and the Hobbs Act, extortion. Extortion is defined as, quote, the obtaining of property from another with his consent induced by wrongful use of actual or threatened force, violence, or fear, or under color of official right. Now, it has a reference to 18 U.S.C. 1951, but that what was just stated is not part of the code, because no code would read like that. But I guess they're trying to make a point. I don't know what 18 U.S.C. 1951 says. If anybody wants to look that up, they're welcome to do so and throw it in chat. I will click on it if you guys want to do that, because sometimes USC changes. Okay, next section, still on the de facto side. Between February 1st, 2007 and April 30th, 2007, the Maywood Police Department towed and impounded some 17,000 vehicles. Holy shit. Attorney General of California. Huh. Right. Yeah, that's a lot of money coming in. Cities collected an impound release fee. Oh, what? Varying from $100 to $500 for each return vehicle or sell the car at auction. Yeah, see, again, this is about the registration of your car. Don't register your car. Go buy one for cash, get the MCO, cop pulls you over, says, yeah, give me your papers. Show him through the window. Do not give it to him. Show him that you have the MCO. And then tell him that if he wants a gunfight, to keep fucking with you. Well, all right, don't do that. That's what I would do, but you get the point. All right, back to the de jure side. A maxim of law. Free people have a right to travel on the roads, which are provided by their servants for that purpose, using ordinary transportation of the day. True. And then this is another court case. This is Rumsfeld versus City of Berkeley. Quote, the streets of a city belong to the people of the state, and every citizen of the state has a right to use thereof. The use of the highways for purposes of travel and transportation is not a mere privilege, but a common and fundamental right, of which the public and individuals cannot rightfully be deprived. All persons, I should say all people, have an equal right to use them for purposes of travel by proper means and with due regard for the corresponding rights of others. That's how we're supposed to do this. Then last thing on the de facto side, vehicle codes do not have an enacting clause. Yes, this is an extremely important point. There are court cases, I have a few from Michigan, which prove the fact that the quote-unquote state vehicle codes, They don't have a proper enactment clause. Now, why does that matter? It's because under the state constitutions, it says that when a law gets passed, it has to have X, Y, Z done to it, right? And one of those things is pretty much always, I've never seen a state that doesn't say this, says that they have to have an enactment clause. And then they'll state what that clause is in the Constitution. It'll be something, and it's kind of like the boilerplate stuff that you see at the beginning of every act. It is hereby enacted by the people of the state of Wisconsin that such and such, la, 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 whatever, by said Congress assembled, or whatever it is, whatever the enactment clause is, it has to be in the act when it's passed. If it's not, it is not a lawful act. It's not law. But they're pretending like it is law. So if you really want to attack somebody, as far as a traffic ticket is concerned, wrap your head around that understanding that every single act, state or federal, has to have an enactment clause. And look up and find and see if your state vehicle codes have enactment clauses. And guess what? You won't find any. That's what you sue them over. But that's how you really get rid of the problem, because they don't want to touch that at all, because they know what they're doing. So anyway. All right, I'm going to stop here. The mail versus mail thing, this whole thing is not something I ever get into. People have made some sort of argument, or think they want to make an argument, that the different uses of the mail somehow puts you in different jurisdictions. Well, it's not going to change your jurisdiction as far as your sovereignty or who you are. Are you perhaps, is it somehow prima facie evidence that you're within a conquered territory after the Civil War with the zip code? Maybe. But anyway, this whole section I'm probably just going to skip, because there's so many things that people go off on a side note and basically get wrong regarding this particular topic. It's crazy. The only thing that's really that I did kind of want to mention about is the use of non-zip code, meaning that you can send something without putting a zip code on it. So it says in the domestic mail manual, or at least it did at this time in 2006, and I actually have gone and read this as well. So domestic mail manual 6021.3E2 says that zip codes may be omitted. Right. So you don't have to put the zip code down. If you don't put the zip code down, just make sure that you spell everything out. Make sure you spell out the state. Make sure you spell out everything that's there, and they'll send it perfectly fine. Okay. So if you don't want to put your zip code on there, if you want to put a zip code on there because you don't own the zip codes, the package will still get there. Okay. So, and then, okay, this is post is collected unlawfully. That's the USC. Okay, so on and so forth. Mail delivered privately. The American Letter Mail Company was started by Lysander Spooner in 1844. Didn't know that. Competing with the legal monopoly of the United States Post Office, now the United States Post Office, in violation of the private express statutes. It succeeded in delivering mail for lower prices, but the U.S. government challenged Spooner with legal measures, eventually forcing him to cease operations in 1851. I didn't know Lysander Spooner ran a post. That's fascinating. Huh. Well, and here's the other thing, everyone. I highly suggest that everybody read good Mr. Spooner's works. You want to talk about somebody who is very aware of the illegitimacy of government as a whole, just from a philosophical standpoint. You probably won't find anybody as articulate in that than Lysander Spooner, for the exception of possibly Thomas Paine and, to a certain extent, Bastiat, who wrote the law. But if you really want to get deep into understanding why government has no legitimacy whatsoever, look up Lysander Spooner. Okay, and then titles of nobility. I don't know why this has anything to do with mailing, but all right. So when we get back next time, we'll start off at schools versus human resource development centers. Spectre said, I knew that 18 USC 242 That's deprivation of rights under color of law. That's another way that you can go after them. If you want to admit that you're a citizen of the United States and you want to take it to federal court. But I'll tell you this, the 242 cases that people put into federal court, suing states and state minions under that particular United States code, like 90%, 95% of them, I think it was some ridiculously high number, they all settle out of court. So it's a really good way to get paid and not really have to do too much. And all you have to do is just very easily learn how to do a federal suit with that statute, which is not rocket science. And if you really want to, you can just go to a federal court and just ask to see all of the 18 USC 242 suits that they've ever filed there, and the clerks would be happy to pull up whatever you want. And you can just sit there and have a field day by copying whatever you want to at the copier and taking them home for your own understanding. All right, so as I said, next time we'll start off with schools versus human resource development, which is exactly what they are. They're just creating mindless automatons to do the work that no one wants to do. Basically, what the Prussian education system does is create someone to be a very, very good wage slave. That's what they do. So, all right, so we'll cover that next time. And if any of you would like to join the Vocational Science Freedom, you can do so by going to the vocationalsciencefreedom.org and downloading the welcome package. You can just click on the welcome package, download it, and it will show you how to join our Revolt server and how to get onto our mega classroom, where we share documents and links, and where we hold class every week, and also where we hold our Wednesday night roundtables that we discuss whatever happens to be on our minds. It is a completely open platform, and we've had some great people explain some great things, particularly to me, because I love to learn things as well. So the Wednesday nights are for VSOF members only, so you got to get vetted to join. But please do so. It's free. So hope to see all you guys on Wednesday night, and I hope everyone enjoyed tonight's class. I hope you learned something. Spread the links, because that's free, and so is knowledge. So until next time, stay safe and stay sovereign.